Assalamu alaikum, dear students. I welcome you to the lecture 6. We are going through chapter number 2, research methods. This is the third part. Okay, today's topic is methods of research. We are done with observational method and experimental method. And today we are going to discuss the survey method and the clinical method or case history method. Okay, so let's begin our today's lecture. Case history or clinical method. Okay, as the name indicates, clinical psychologists use this method to diagnose the mental illnesses. Okay, case history or clinical method is a method of research in which clinical psychologists diagnose the mental illnesses, and then after diagnosis, they provide proper treatment. This method is also applied to learn about the individual's different personality traits and mental cognitive processes as well, like intelligence, their emotional responses, their aptitudes, their attitudes, their interests, their motivation, their motivational aspect of personality, or any sort of conflicts in the personality, or we can say that the personality crisis, and so on. Okay, so case history method is used for the diagnosis of different personality traits and or specifically mental illnesses. In this method, the individual's past is also uncovered through the analysis of his present behavior. Okay, the clinical psychologist works on his conscious, unconscious, and subconscious part of mind, and then analyze those points, and then analyze his mind, analyze his behavior according to those responses. There are three persons who are needed to gather information through this method. Number one, clinical psychologist. Number two, a psychiatrist. And number three, social worker. Okay, what is the job of clinical psychologist? Clinical psychologist notes the information and records the responses given by the subject. Okay, clinical psychologist finds the nature of mental illnesses. He takes case history, he studies the mental processes, he applies different psychotherapies, he can apply different psychological tests to assess and to diagnose the illness, assess or to diagnose the problem. Number two, second person is the psychiatrist. Psychiatrist, or we can say that the second person can be a doctor, physician, or a psychiatrist who examines the patient and determines any physical ailment. So, the purpose of clinical psychologist is to study the mental illness, to find the nature of mental illness, and the role of psychiatrist is to underline or to determine or to find out any physical ailment regarding that psychological illness, regarding that uh, behavior, regarding that personality trait. Okay, and the third person is the social worker. The third important person is social worker. He gathers information from the subject or the people living around him. We can take information from the family, from the peer group, or from the neighbors, relatives, friends, and so on. The purpose behind contacting these people or these persons is to see whether the information given by the subject or patient is correct or not. Okay, or we can say that we can take much better view of the personality of an individual by taking view of the people living with him. Okay, so these are the three persons who gather information about the person through clinical method: a clinical psychologist, a psychiatrist, and a social worker. Okay, these three people gather complete information about the patient's life. They usually collect data and then they work on that data. The data can be collected in the form of interview. A conversation is made in a light atmosphere in which the clinical psychologist, psychiatrist, social worker, all these people take information, gather proper information so that a proper diagnosis is made and so that proper treatment could be given. If diagnosis is not proper or accurate, then there would be no we cannot be sure about the treatment, that if it is working or not. Different probing techniques can be used, cross questioning can be made, and use of tests also. So, in the light of all this information, you collected data, it is decided that now which type of psychotherapy or therapeutic treatment should be applied. Let me talk about the psychological tests. Psychological tests are simple as well as complex. They are used to extend the individual's interview. For example, we can apply the free association, or we can apply the sentence completion test, house tree person test, and so on. The environment and educational background of the client or patient lie behind the selection of psychological tests. So, what is the significance of this case history method? Is it clear? Number one, it makes it easier to diagnose the mental illnesses. Case history method makes it easier to diagnose because in this method we take the detailed account of client's symptoms, client's behavior, and his behavior in the environment, or we can assess any sort of physical ailment related to that mental illness. This method facilitates treatment because we gather a huge sort of information and then that information helps us in proper diagnosis. Psychological or clinical tests are also applied. Various experts work together to examine the patient and prepare a report on his condition. Okay. So this method, this case history method or clinical method has been criticized also because at the same time so many experts are required and it is very difficult to verify the information given by the client. It is not always easy to verify that information. Or we can say that it is an expensive and prolonged method as well. And another drawback of this method is that in case of serious illness, in case of serious problems or diseases, the patient cannot be interviewed. He will not be in the position to give us proper, accurate responses. So, in short, correct diagnosis is the only effective method to treat and save the clients. This was all about the case history or clinical method. Let's move to the next research method. Okay. Next method is the survey method. Okay. What is survey method? Survey method is a scientific method of seeking people's opinion on a specific problem. The questions asked in survey may be in oral or written form. Okay. So what is survey method? In survey method, we ask questions related to a specific problem and then we take the responses and overall we take the average results. This is the most widely used method of research in the present age. Okay, it is the preferred choice to gather data on people's views and social problems and conditions and so on. We can apply survey method to so many issues and problems. This method was actually practiced in England in 18th century. In those days, all people related to an issue were directly asked for their opinion. But later on, For the lack of time and resources in 20th century, it has been restricted to the answers received from a limited members of the society. Okay, and apart from psychology, we see that this research method is also used in so many other fields: sociology, economics, politics, and so on. So research method, this survey method, is a very useful method in which we ask questions either orally or verbally, or oral or written form, and then the responses are statistically analyzed. Stages of survey: number one, formulation of a problem; number two, population and sampling; number three, tool of survey; number four, data collection; n- number five, data analysis; and number six, results. So, we are going to discuss these stages in detail. Formulation of a problem. The first stage of survey method is the formulation of problem. What is the goal or objective? Okay, formulation of a problem is sort of a prerequisite in survey. There should be a clearly well defined problem. The problem formulated for a survey should have some psychological, social, economic, and relevance, you can say. The information relating to the problem should be get-able. Moreover, the formulation of problem should lead to the highlighting of the problems and the difficulties and their solution as well. So, what is the goal or objective behind this? The proper formulation of a problem is very important and is done on the basis of information gathered from people. Following the formulation of problem, the surveyor should explain the objective of the survey. What is the objective of the survey? In this problem, we highlight that what is the basic objective of doing this survey. We highlight that we are going to study this variable or this trait in this particular part of society. Okay. While conducting the survey, the surveyor or the researcher collects the already available information and formulates a problem on the basis of that information. And during this very process, he happens to hit on many solutions as well, and thus various hypotheses comes in his mind. As we have read about hypothesis in the previous research method, in the experimental method, that what is hypothesis? It is a tentative solution or tentative statement about a problem, and this hypothesis is elaborated and verified during the survey. Once a problem is formulated on the basis of gathered information, we determine the problem, and the problem explains the objective of the survey. While going through the problem, we formulate hypothesis and then we work on that hypothesis. Okay. Second stage is Second stage of survey method is population and sampling. Once the problem has been determined, once a hypothesis has been formed, then we look for the population and we get a sample of that population and we apply our our questionnaire to that population. On which population we are going to apply, or on which population we are going to do our research or survey. What is population? All the individuals who may be studied with reference to a specific problem are called population. Okay. For example, if we want to conduct a survey on the causes of beggary in any particular area, so all the beggars in living all the beggars living in that area or in that town will be called population. ठीक है? However, if our survey relates to female beggars or juvenile beggars, our population will consist of only female beggars and juvenile beggars. Done? Yes. Then what is sample? Since it is not possible to collect information from the whole population individually, okay, it is not possible. It is a very time consuming process, it is very expensive, and it is a very longitudinal process if we begin to take information or gather information from each and every person of that area. So a few individuals are selected from among the population. These selected individuals are known as sample. While drawing a sample, the researcher has to be very careful that all the members of the population have equal representation. Okay? Thus, there will be a reasonable possibility that a sample has all the characteristics of the population. Selecting a sample is a critical process. We have to make sure that the selected sample has all the characteristics of the population. It should be random sampling. Okay? And the information which we gather through sampling can later on be applied to the whole population. You see, we take random sample from this whole population, keeping in view that the characteristics are same. There are so many techniques or types of sampling, so the researcher has to choose one of those types according to his survey. For this purpose, the researcher has to take into account the characteristics of population apart from the objectives, significance, and the actual requirement of the survey. And no matter what is the type of sampling, it must have all the characteristics of population. Okay. For example, we cannot check all the bullets manufactured in an arms factory by finding them one by one. The quality of bullets will be decided by the performance of sample consisting of few bullets. Similarly, we cannot ask each and every person about a certain problem. We select a sample. Okay, coming to the next stage of survey, tool of a survey. So, after selection of a sample, we see that what is the tool of survey? It generally comprises a questionnaire or a or an interview. What is a questionnaire? To gather information related to a problem in a survey, various points are converted into a list of questions. Okay? So, a good questionnaire should have the following qualities. Number one, a questions should be adequate in number so that we could we could maintain the interest of the subject as well. It should be adequate in number, keeping in view the time limit also. Questionnaires should be having the questions should be in simple language. We are supposed to use the simple language so that everybody could understand it. Ambiguous words should be avoided. Unrelated questions should be avoided, and questions should not seek private information. Okay, so a questionnaire, what is a questionnaire? Different points are converted into a list of questions, and a good questionnaire has an adequate number of questions, and there is a simple use of language and no ambiguity. Unrelated questions are not asked. General questions related to that problem are asked in a very lighter way. With this questionnaire, there may be the responses are either open ended or closed ended. The questionnaire usually comprises of two types of questions. Either they are close-ended questions or open-ended questions. What are close-ended questions? These refer to the questions in which the researcher himself provides two or more than two answers, and the respondent is bound to choose from the given options. The options can be true, false, yes, no, or in the form of MCQs. Okay, these are closed-ended questions in which the respondent is not free to answer. He has to choose among the options given. What are open-ended questions? Questions in which the respondent is free to give response of his own choice. Okay, so a questionnaire may be having closed-ended questions or open-ended questions. This depends upon the nature of uh, nature of problem or nature of survey being made. Okay, the second tool of survey can be interview. What is interview? An interview is a face-to-face conversation between two or more than two people. Usually interview is conducted in either of the two following ways: structured interview or unstructured interview. Structured interviewer sets out all the questions in an order and is not allowed to modify or vary the questions. A structured interview is already a pre-planned interview in which the interviewer sets the questions before the interview, and he is not free to ask the questions other than those planned questions. What is an unstructured interview? The number and order of questions are not predetermined, nor are the questions set down in advance. So, unstructured interview is a type of interview in which the questions are not pre planned. The interviewee is engaged in an informal sort of conversation. If required, further questions are asked in explanation of the given answers by the interviewee. And in this unstructured interview, one point leads to the other and so on. So the researcher extracts maximum information and tries to get close to the core of the problem. Okay, so the next stage of survey method is data collection. At this stage, it is decided how the survey tool is to be used. How? How will it collect the data? How this questionnaire or interview should be conducted? If the questionnaire is to be got filled by the sample, what will be its procedure? Okay. The questionnaire can also be got filled by gathering the people at some place, or sent through email, or sent through a post, or can be posted. Beside this, the questionnaire can be sent to homes. The questionnaire can also be used or also be given to school children so that they may bring it back tomorrow after having it filled by their parents. Okay, so every method has its own advantages and disadvantages. So we take care of how we are going to collect data so that we get a valid data, not the fake data. So how this data is analyzed. After collection of data, we send the questionnaires. How we collect data? We send the questionnaires either by hand, either by post. We give a little bit of instructions before we start the procedure. We give little bit instructions to the subjects that how to answer the questions. Once the data is collected, now this data is analyzed using statistical tools. The data is analyzed in the form of statistical grids, graphs, or other statistical principles are used for this purpose. We can use different statistical tools like mean, median, mode, standard deviation, t-distribution, so on. Okay, the last stage is the results. The analysis of information leads to results. Results tell us whether the proposed hypotheses are proved, whether cause and effect relationships exist or not. Okay. After the tabulation of results, various suggestions regarding the survey are also made. So, there are certain advantages of this survey method. It is a useful and easy method. It can be applied very often. We can apply these questionnaires once the questionnaire has been formed. So we can apply these questionnaires. We can apply these questionnaires to a large number of population and gather information. It has a wide scope. It can be applied anywhere. This is a sort of inexpensive method. This method is helpful in other sciences also. Trained personnels are not required to conduct a survey. An option, and there is an option of interview for illiterate also. Okay, if there are illiterate people who are unable to read and write, so we can interview them regardless of giving them a questionnaire. There are certain disadvantages or criticism on this method also. This method involves a lot of labor, okay, a lot of hard work. The researcher, how he should uh, give the questionnaires to the people, and then to collect those questionnaires, then to verify the data, then to analyze the data, then use statistical tools and so on. And a second important criticism is that the selection of sample is very difficult. If the sample is not selected properly, or if we do not get a random sample, then the results may be varied. Results may not be valid. If only preset questionnaire is used, people cannot express their opinions freely. Okay, if we use the closed-ended questionnaires, so sometimes people are unable to reply freely because their reply may lie in between those already given options. Okay, another criticism, it said if sent by post, there's a little likelihood of it being returned. So the distribution of the questionnaires and the क्या कहते हैं, collection of those questionnaires is a difficult process, and there is likelihood of it being not returned and so on. So this was about today's lecture. We read about the case history or clinical method and the survey method. We are done with chapter number 2, research methods. We are done with the types of research methods. We done There are 4 research methods. We are done with the observational method, experimental method, case history or clinical method, and the survey method. So this was the end of chapter number 2. I thank you, and Allah Hafiz.